Miss Holland Taylor, thank you so much for being here today and happy National Voter Registration Day.
Well, it is an important day. It's never been more important than right now. I know people say that every election season, but this time it's true, baby. I'm
I
glad.
hear you. You get it already. You get it already.
Please call me Holland. Miss
Well,
Taylor. Anybody says Miss Taylor, I say, is Elizabeth here?
I was like, you have that Emmy behind you, okay? Listen, an icon in your own right. But I wanted to have you here today, an honorary Texan on this day, but so much of what we're doing is helping to elevate artists and young activists across the state to work together to turn people out to register to vote. And I think nobody better has used their platform and the projects that they've been a part of to really advance activism and advance causes. So I'm really excited to dig in with you today. And we can start with Anne, I think. Where better to start for Texas?
Start and end.
The beginning and end of it all. But I guess
and the Omega of Texas Four.
Why were you drawn to that project? You wrote, starred in the one-woman show about Ann Richards. Why Anne?
Well, you say, why was I drawn to that project? There was no project. There was something that got born out of my, actually my grief that she died so unexpectedly. I had met her once with Liz Smith. I'd had lunch with her, probably about when she was about 70 or 71 or so. And that's not why I did this. I mean, I happen to have had personal experience of her. And but she was a real hero for me. I remember her election. I remember how astonished I was. I hadn't followed Texas politics, but I certainly followed that race. I kind of couldn't believe it. And then just the glory of her inauguration and how exciting it was to have this extraordinary woman in Texas. And she was followed quite a lot in national press. She made a ripple wherever she went. And then, of course, in her years, the decade after she was governor was where she really became an international icon, recognized. We see that flock of white hair in Tiananmen Square, and there'd be a mob around her in minutes, which was actually true. And she just was really important person in my universe, much more important than I knew, such that when she died, and I knew she had been unwell, but it just seemed to happen so quickly. And she had just turned 73, and so, which is very young in these days to die. And I could not deal with a world that did not have her in it. And that made me realize how much she mattered to me, in the sense of, if she was around to comment and to cheer us on, because she did find everything funny in the end and had such a marvelous positive sense of humor. And some Black humor in her as well, gallows humor. I just couldn't stand it, and I stayed mournful for a naturally long period of time. And when you feel those great feelings, most of us want to do something with it. I mean, everybody is creative in some degree or other. We want to do something with the feelings, and I, as an actor, well, I sort of was of the right age then. That was in my 60s then. I thought I could play her. I think I could play her. And then I was musing on all the possibilities. And one day I was driving to work, and I wondered why I hadn't really taken action. I hadn't called some producer friends who also knew her and loved her, like George Clooney and Norman Lear. Why hadn't I called them to say, let's do something? And I suddenly realized, because it's a live play, because she's theater. She loved the theater, but mainly she is someone best depicted in the theater, the live contact with the audience, which was a kind of magic she had, lightning in a bottle. And I thought, if I could be like her, if I could really create her like a hologram, the inspiration, some of it anyway, would come right along with it, I thought. And I quickly was galvanized by this notion that became like a real mission. And
Mhm.
I'm not a spiritual person particularly. I'm not woo. I don't, I've had a really very earthbound kind of life. I've had a lot of luck in my career, but a lot of it's been just, elbow grease and dedication and persistence. So that I would do this extraordinary thing, which is extraordinary accomplishment by any measure. I researched it for 3 years, and I researched it at a very high level. I mean, through good fortune and good connections, I was starting with Liz Smith, and who got me to Cecile Richards, who was a friend, and Ann Richards had been a very close friend of Liz's. So I was introduced to the family and then to the important people around Anne as governor, who were also her best friends.
Yeah.
I mean, certainly many of the men and women in her administration were friends, personal friends, as well as political friends, long before she ever ran for office at all.
Yeah.
She didn't do that till she was in her 40s. So I suddenly found myself able to be in contact with anybody who was important in her world.
Mhm.
And I did it. And I went to Texas many times. I traveled to other places too, to New York, to Vancouver Island, to see, to Salt Springs Island, to see Jane Hickey, who was her great consigliere, and to Washington to see Jennifer Treat, other places to see people like Kathy Bonner, and to Dallas, off my beaten path in Texas and Austin. I went to Dallas to meet with Mary Beth Rogers, who also then traveled to Santa Fe to stay with me, and Claire Korioth, who was her greatest old friend, also the head of the insurance board. So I spent a tremendous amount of time with the people who were her people.
Mhm.
There's no way that can top that for getting to know someone, as well as my access to the archive and to a great deal of film on her. I probably have 300 hours of film on her. So I spent 3 years in a deep dive, a really deep dive, where I got to know her persona, which is what I was always in search of. This is not a biography, although there's a lot of interesting stuff in it that did happen. But I was in search of who she was. Because as I often say to people, it's not what she said, it's not what she did, it's who she was.
Mhm.
Who she was that stayed with people forever.
One last question about Anne before we hop into some other topics. But do you have a favorite Anne Richards quote that you picked up along the way?
No, none of her, there's only a few lines in the play that are actually quotes from her. People,
Mhm.
because of how some other, like for instance, Mark Twain Tonight is all, it's literature. Mark Twain
Yeah.
was a writer. It's all his writing uh, that Hal Holbrook developed. This is not, this is written by me because I knew enough about her, learned enough about her that I believed I could accurately create her. So a few quotes from her in the play, but certainly none of the buzz quotes that she's famous for, because they had no place in this play. But she was not as good as her one-liners and her jokes were. She liked to really develop ideas. So some of her quotes are longer because
Mhm.
she liked to spin out her reasoning about something. She was a very smart woman. She fought like a general, take that hill. She took long views on things. And so she sometimes had more to say. But one quintessential thing that I did put in the play in that call to action was, after summoning people to at least vote, which half the country doesn't do, which is still hard for me to believe, and I'm sure it was always hard for her to believe, because it's the one thing that we have that's still real, I think. But after this exhortation, for the different, that she both cajoles, persuades, demands, asks for people to participate in government, she ends with something Anne actually did say, which is, why should your life be just about you?
Amazing. I want to turn to some of your other work, just kind of more broadly, because I think activism really is a part, and there are so many messages in so much of your work, whether it be equality and feminism and Legally Blonde, or the rich kind of power of Anne, and then Hollywood more recently,
Yes, yes, had a
which has
wonderful
this
part.
brilliant message of reimagining what Hollywood I think still could be, not even what it could have been, but what it still could be.
Right.
Um, I was just watching it last night to kind of get ready for this interview, and I love there's a line from it where Darren Criss says, "You don't realize the power you have. Hollywood can show people what's possible." And I think you've done that in so much of your work. And I wonder how much of that's been intentional, or if it's just inherent to who you are and
I
kind
think
of.
it's inherent to who I am, and I mean, I never think of, and even in Hollywood, I didn't. I
Mhm.
mean, I'm very character specific. I'm a Stella Adler trained actor. I'm not thinking about myself while I'm working. Of course, I am myself while
Yeah.
I'm working. So obviously I am using myself, but not in the sense of a conscious application of my own thoughts or feelings. I'm trying to be in the imaginary circumstance of the character, which often requires some research, as in the case of Hollywood, or certainly Anne. So if my characters, I've had the good fortune of playing some fabulous women, so I get to do fabulous things and say fabulous things and achieve some fabulous results and carry some fabulous messages. But I remember specifically, I mean, Hollywood is very recent. I remember the feeling of shooting it, and I remember I ad-libbed something. It wasn't really intentional. I didn't plan to do it, but uh, they kept it in because it was correct. The characters talking about casting this Black girl, or what would have in 1947 been called a colored girl, this young colored actress in this role. And I said something like, "When are we ever going to finally let a colored girl star in a movie?" And I said, "Star in a goddamn movie." And it was just it just popped out, but it was right because it carried the frustration of this, decent woman who was a very smart film involved in the filmmaking world, and was just, a person who was more enlightened perhaps than some others around her, or less frightened of the political or financial outcome.
Yeah.
She believed it would work. She believed it would work because it was right, or that it was better, it was good to do because it was right, because it would make its own truth in time, which is, I think, what correct deeds in the political world do. That sometimes it might be rocky and beginning with new policies and new programs, but they're right, and they will eventually become strong and stable in how we do things in our world.
Yeah.
So I think it's always from the character point of view. I'm never thinking politically, but then our deeds are political often when we don't think they are.
I think just as we close out this conversation,
No, don't let's end.
I was like, we can keep going. Okay, we can keep going. But what is your message to people about getting registered this year? We're in the final days of being able to get registered before this critical election. And regardless of who folks are voting for, why do you think it's so important to get registered and get out there this year?
I think, there was a period of time I was very defeated, profoundly so. I was a senior in college when Jack Kennedy, who was my first president, as it were, my president, although I wasn't able to vote for him. I was too young to vote then. And Jack Kennedy was assassinated, and then Malcolm X, who was a hero of mine, was assassinated, and then Martin Luther King was assassinated, and in short order, Robert Kennedy was assassinated, and I kind of dropped out.
Mhm.
I didn't even read the newspaper. I mean, I really dropped out for about 10 years. And when I came back, I remember feeling I understood why I had disappeared, and it had not really been a choice. It had been something that happened to me. But now in recent years, I could actually almost weep. Um, voting for Obama made me weep. And just everything about voting, going there, waiting, filling it out, every moment of it was voting for Obama, both times. And, you know, and then voting for Hillary. The fact is, voting is the most sacred thing we have. In many countries, they don't even have it. And if they do, it is absolutely without meaning. But it still has meaning here.
Mhm.
And certainly if you go to the polls, God knows the post office has been branded and besmirched now by this president. So, but the vote is the most precious experience you can have, to experience fully and appreciate what you are doing. And I know, 40 to 50% of the country does not vote. And if any one person now is listening to me who does not vote, I beg you to understand that you are missing something that could be very precious to you. It is your voice in the government. It is the minimal first step to participating in your government. And I beg you to consider doing it this year. That's all I can say.
I don't think I can say it any better than that. So I will leave it there. Thank you so much for joining us today. And thank you for your time and for your amazing work. Such a big fan. So thank you so much.
Thank you very much. I've enjoyed it very much, Charlie.